arriving, and so we will just be getting ready to start in a few moments as we navigate having a wide audience through the live stream, thanks to Friends of Sabeel North America, and also have live in person here in Washington, D.C. We'll wait just about another minute. Okay, I think we will get started here. I'm grateful for each of you in attendance tonight. Welcome to Washington City Church of the Brethren. And you are joining us either in person here in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill or via the live stream, thanks to Friends of Sabeel North America and their live stream. I'm grateful to Friends of Sabeel North America, or FOSNA, Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, or PCAP, and Pax Christi USA, as well as my own congregation, Washington City Church of the Brethren, for sponsoring this event tonight. Why are we here? We are here for a teach-in on building Christian solidarity with Palestine. Some of us might be bringing with us years of depth, maybe even decades of working for a free Palestine, for peace and justice and equality throughout the Holy Land. Some of us might be new, compelled because of just the unfathomable violence, suffering, and deaths in Gaza, the violence in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we want to know, what can we do together? How can we continue to build momentum and solidarity with our siblings in Christ, for our siblings in Christ in Palestine, as well as for Palestinians generally? As Christians, we lament the ongoing catastrophe and genocide in Gaza. We want to work for a just future for Palestinians so that all people might live in justice, safety, and peace in the Holy Land. And we hear the words of Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac that Christ is in the rubble. And so if Christ is in the rubble, where too should Christians be? Living and acting in solidarity with those under the rubble and those facing violence and ongoing oppression. As Jesus said in Matthew 25, truly I tell you, just as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. As followers of Jesus, we're centered on the person, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, of Jesus born in Bethlehem, of Jesus murdered by the Romans in Jerusalem, of Jesus who rose as well. We look to Jesus's ministry and witness in Luke 4, along with many other places, to guide and inspire our own ministry of reconciliation and justice. Jesus declared at the start of his ministry, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So this work, I believe, is just really essential to our ministry as Christians in continuing the work of Jesus. So what concrete steps can followers of Jesus take to build solidarity with Palestinians? Well, we've outlined sort of 4 different themes or umbrella points to catch in some of the different ways that we can do this work. Building solidarity through delegations, through advocacy, through economic means, and by putting our bodies in the streets, or nonviolent direct action. So I am grateful again for each of you to be here, and I ask that you would pray with me. God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God of Sarah, Hagar, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, God of the prophets, those voices in the wilderness who foretold and foretold about injustice, violence, and oppression, God of justice and also mercy, God of Jesus, the Word of God made flesh and blood, the Word embodied, who moved into the neighborhood, a neighborhood under empire, under oppression, under occupation. Jesus of Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Jerusalem, we look to you for wisdom, courage, and power to resist and name and transform the oppressions in our world. We pray for an end to violence in Gaza and in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. We lament, we mourn, we confess the ways that we and our country have been culpable, and we commit to standing and seeking ways forward for justice. In the name of Jesus, the resurrected one, amen. All right, so I invite our section, actually, Jacob, can you share screen? Thank you. So this is our title slide and next slide. So as I mentioned already, these are the different ways that we are building Christian solidarity through delegations, embodying presence, advocacy, political and social cultural, economic means, and putting our bodies in the streets through nonviolent direct action. So we have an array of speakers tonight, and I'm really excited about the different panelists who I will introduce as we come up, and they can also add more if needed. But we'll start with delegations, with embodying presence. Next slide. So for this, we're highlighting especially a delegation that I was part of, and Scott and Janet Lara-Lewis, Scott Wright, Janet Lara-Lewis, and I were on the Stones Cry Out Delegation, and I invite Scott Wright to come up to be able to share more about this delegation, and then there'll be time for both Janet and I to offer some reflections about our time there as well.
Thank you, Jen. And a deep bow of gratitude to our Palestinian sisters and brothers, both here in the United States and in Palestine. Janet and I were part of the Stones Cry Out Delegation, February 27th to March 4th, to the West Bank. We were 22 participants from 12 different ecumenical Christian denominations. And we visited, we were hosted in Bethlehem by the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church, Reverend Munther Isaac's church. We visited Bethlehem, East Jerusalem, Hebron, and Ramallah. Over 5 days, in addition to those communities, we heard from a number of Palestinian Christian groups. We heard from Sabeel and we heard from Kairos, Palestine. We heard from a number of Palestinian human rights organizations defending political prisoners and the Military Court Watch, who spoke to us of thousands of Palestinians held in administrative detention, including huge numbers of children. We visited the Palestinian refugee camps and we spoke with the director, West Bank director of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency that oversees 900,000 refugees in the West Bank. That currently, because of accusations, false accusations against it, and the actions of at least 17, if not more, nations to cut off funding, has put in deep jeopardy the well-being of people of Gaza, including mass starvation that's already taking place. What did we hear? We heard from one person that everything has changed and nothing has changed since October 7th. Nothing has changed, he said, because it's the same situation, particularly since the 1967 occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, but even going back to 1948. Everything has changed because the magnitude of settler violence, violence of Israeli soldiers in the West Bank, persecution, the demolitions, the arrests, the torture, but specifically too, the ongoing slaughter and genocide in Gaza. We heard that this is a US war. We heard that on a number of occasions from different speakers, Palestinian speakers. They said without US weapons and US political cover at the United Nations, there would be no war, there would be no slaughter in Gaza, there would be no genocide. So our nation is complicit. And we also heard a deep thank you for our presence. Many people in the West Bank and Jerusalem and in Bethlehem is surrounded by 50, 60 checkpoints. Since October 7th, I think at least 200,000 Palestinians of the West Bank have been unable to go to work in Israel. Since October 7th, the economy of Bethlehem, which is heavily dependent on tourism, is practically zero. And so I think this is a significant point. We all know the horror stories, the deep suffering, the ethnic cleansing, the genocide, the apartheid. But I want to lift up also the amazing resilience, the sumud of the Palestinian people, and their deep gratitude for solidarity, costly solidarity, in the words of Reverend Munter Isaac, but solidarity in the form of delegations, at least as one form, is increasingly important. To come and see with our own eyes and to go back to our own communities and to continue to work against policies of our own government that continue to fuel the suffering, the violence, the genocide of the Palestinian people. We heard we need deep solutions. We need to continually go back to 1967 and the occupation. We need to continually go back to the partition in 1948. There are two conflicting narratives, but only one really in this country has been heard since 1948. So this solidarity through delegations is incredibly important. I represented Pax Christi USA. Like many historic peace churches, including this church, Church of the Brethren, Mennonites, the Quakers, Pax Christi USA is part of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, part of a global Catholic movement for nonviolence and peace. It was born out of the ashes of World War II, 1944, of people in both Germany and France reaching across, already beginning to look for just solutions and reconciliation between their communities. So today, we lift up that commitment to nonviolence. We lift up that commitment rooted in just solutions and deep solutions that go back in this historical context to 1967, the illegal occupation of Palestine, and to 1948, the partition of Palestine. We lift up the right of refugees to return to their lands, to remember the story of the Nakba, the destruction of 500 Palestinian villages and of 750,000 Palestinians forcibly displaced, and most living outside of Palestine. We continue, we have to remember what happened. We cannot forget, because if we forget, there will be no just solution. And so we have a responsibility as US citizens to help educate our churches and our people. And to say that, to take a stand in favor of justice, in favor of the Palestinian communities, is not anti-Semitic. We are committed as historic peace churches, as Pax Christi, to work against anti-Semitism, to work against Islamophobia, and to work against Christian nationalism, because all three of those are fueling a narrative of violence and of injustice against the Palestinian people. In the end of September of this year, Pax Christi International will honor the Peace Circle Families Forum of Palestinians and Israelis who have lost loved ones on both sides, and who for 19 years have been working together for just solutions, for equal dignity in Palestine and Israel. And we lift up that as a vision of hope, that Palestinians and Israelis can live together in the same land. But the only way that that will happen is if 1967 and 1948 is addressed, if the refugees have the right to return, Palestinian refugees, and if we do our work in this country as US citizens and as churches to stop military aid to Israel that is only fomenting the violence in the region, and to continue to support Palestinian brothers and sisters, and those Israelis who also share a vision of equal dignity for Palestinians. That is our hope, and that is our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And I neglected to say that Scott he mentioned Pax Christi, and he's a recognized Pax Christi USA Ambassador of Peace. He was on this delegation, and a person I'm privileged to get to know, him and his wife, Jean, who have a long history of peacemaking. Also, I'd like to introduce next Janet Lair-Lewis, who was also on the Stones Cry Out Delegation. And amongst other things, I don't think I have time to read her whole bio, but Janet Lair-Lewis is a retired United Methodist missionary who served as the liaison to Palestine and Israel from 2006 to 2014, and where she lived in the West Bank from 1994 to 2014. She's also involved in advocacy around Wadi Fuqin and other Middle East peacemaking and advocacy here in the US. And I'm sure she will say more about that later, about advocacy. And right now she will share, as someone who has been in Palestine for many, many years, she came back as part of the Stones Cry Out delegation. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you all this evening, even if it's via Zoom. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack than what Scott talked about, partly because he did an excellent job already about talking about our particular delegation. Uh, a lot of the work that I have done in the past is helping to organize itineraries for delegations and for just basic church group visits. And how do you include, what are some of the aspects of that, and how do you include an advocacy component to what we call your cookie cutter tour? Um, we try to encourage people. First of all, the first thing you want to do if you are thinking of taking a delegation, or your church, or some people in your so clergy are thinking of sending a group over, and this is, Scott mentioned, it's the number one way to learn about the situation is to come and see for yourself, because there's no better way to be able to discuss the issue when you've seen it for yourself. Uh, the first thing you need to think about is, who's your target audience? Who are you going to try to influence by taking a trip over? Is it going to be your basic pilgrimage with people from your church? Are you going to focus on, for example, taking a group of attorneys who will go back and be able to say, no, these laws are, look at the laws that are on our own books and how our participation in the region violates even our own laws. The Leahy Law is one of those. Are you focusing on general information? Is this going to combine a pilgrimage with meetings with organizations, which is typically how I try to encourage people to take a trip over? Don't just run where Jesus walked. You need to actually meet the people on the ground who have been witnesses for thousands of years to what's been going on in the region. How can you include those voices in your itinerary? Um, one of the easy ways to do that is to work with a local tour agency. There are many excellent ones. A lot of people who book a tour in the United States, they have to have a ground operator. They work with a local tour agency for all of the buses and the hotels, et cetera, et cetera. If you're paying for a trip, you have a right to make certain requests of that trip. We would like to visit this particular organization when we're in Bethlehem, or this particular organization when we're in the Galilee. It's very easy request. If your agency says, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have time for it, we don't know where it's located, blah, 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 get a different agency, or ask assistance from people who do know how to answer those questions. The length of the trip is another thing to consider. This particular trip was, in my mind, very short, but it was short for a reason. It was very specific. If you are trying to include clergy, you certainly don't want your trip to span more than one Sunday. It's very difficult for clergy to be away for more than one Sunday. You can do a 10-day or even a 12-day trip, keeping in mind that 3 solid days are going to be just travel days. So you have to keep that in mind with the length of your trip. Israeli versus Palestinian organizations. There are many, many Israeli organizations that most of the churches partner with, who can give you excellent information on, like, for example, B'Tselem is an Israeli human rights organization, BIMCOM in Tel Aviv, Zukrot in Tel Aviv, the Coalition of Women for Peace, which is an organization made up of both West Bank Palestinian women and Israeli women, getting their input and having them host you for part of the day. I noticed one of our participants on our delegation was Josh Viss, who he has an excellent video on YouTube, and he actually, in his video included two of the Israeli tour guides that I use from an organization called Green Olive Tours, where they take you on a settlement tour, or they take you on the route of the wall, or they take you on a tour of inside the old city, showing you where all of the Jewish settlements are inside the old city. Uh, they can be excellent. They're registered tour guides, but they work for an organization that is trying to promote equality and justice for the Palestinians. So, they do exist. They are out there. Keep in mind, even though a lot of delegations focus on what's happening in the West Bank, the Palestinian community inside Israel is also has its own challenges, shall we say. There are human rights organizations that are forced to operate inside Israel in order to make sure that the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, but second-class citizens, have a way of exercising their own rights. There's still land confiscation, there's still water control, there's still a lot of the issues that you see in the West Bank happening in Palestinian villages inside Israel that no one talks about. So making sure that you include the other side of the border, shall we say, in your education process. And these trips should be an education process. There is no way you can get someone to advocate for something without educating them on the issue first, which is why these delegations are so important. Making sure that you promote the trip across churches. If you're trying to get just people from your own congregation, obviously that would be easy. Many times it's a lot easier to advertise through your church networks. I know in the Methodist Church we have conferences and districts and jurisdictions and on like that. There are people who are actually paid to help you advertise these kinds of things. So make use of those people. One of the things that I always tried to do in the groups that I organized was to have a covenant form at the end of the trip. You don't want people to go on a tour, even a tour, without having some kind of responsibility at the end of the tour. And typically I would have a form, and I just have the individuals fill out that form that say, this is what I will do in 1 month after returning. This is what I will do in 6 months. And this is what I will do within a year after returning from this trip. It makes them have a personal commitment to doing something with that information. And that's what we want to happen. We don't want people to go home and say, oh, look at these pretty pictures of this great trip I took on. You want them to talk about what they saw and the realities that they saw, the people they heard from, the organizations they met with at their churches, in their communities. Then you want them to move up the advocacy ladder, to speaking at conferences, to organizing conferences, to participating in demonstrations, etc. We'll talk about that later on in the evening. But having a simple covenant form puts it, and having people put it on paper, cements that in their brain that they need to take some action once the trip is over. And that's a really critical part of any delegation that goes over there. It should be part of that. Another thing that should be provided as part of a delegation is the resources that people can use upon their return. Don't just send them back to their own devices. It's very difficult. Having them keep in touch with the other people on their trip. That's also very critical. But providing just a simple sheet with a few websites, organizational names. I know the UMKR, United Methodist Kairos Response Organization, has an entire sheet of books and websites and places where people can get more information, and other organizations have the same. So just providing a few website links where they can find out more um, in order to help them in that covenant process in moving forward with the what they should do upon their return will help facilitate their advocacy work. Many places, and Scott kind of touched on this, a lot of places that we went, we were only like the second delegation that had been since October 7th. Um, a lot of people, are afraid to go. Oh, it's too dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. Things are picking up right now. Uh, and going to places that the usual tour groups don't go, into the villages. Um, if you don't know where to go, and almost every church that's in the region, even if you don't have a church, like the Methodist Church only has one church, and that's in Tel Aviv, and it's brand new. We don't have churches in the region, but we work with uh, ecumenically with the other, like the Presbyterians and the Quakers and the Mennonites and on and on. We all work jointly over there as a group, and we all partner with many of the same organizations, and others are different organizations, both Muslim, Christian, and Jewish. And so getting that information on who your church is partnering with can be very helpful, and finding out more, um, and finding out. This is how Jen mentioned that I'm part of an organization called Friends of Wadi Fukin. Wadi Fukin is a neighboring village from Nahalin, which is where the Tent of Nations is located. We visited that on our delegation. It's the next village over, and it's very few people go there because they don't know it exists. Is there's only one way to get in, and it's usually blocked. Just taking a group there or to Tent of Nations or some of these other out of the way places, we consider that a ministry of presence. And you don't need to take money with you. I mean, they won't say no, but just your showing up, particularly in difficult times like now, that is so much appreciated by the people who live there. They get so much hope from that. I can't even underestimate that, and I understress that, how important that is to the local people of your just showing up. So I'm gonna end here, and Wimont, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janet. I think it's great what Scott prepared, what you prepared, because I prepared something different. And since we wanted to share, we had 3 people from the Stones Cry Out delegation. We are highlighting the delegations and this embodied presence. We will have something at the end of the night just to allude to, sort of like that commitment that Janet mentioned. Friends of Sabeel North America has prepared a resource that where I'm going to be emailing out to all participants, both online and in person, that asks you what are some of the ways, highlighting different strategies, providing resources that you can build solidarity with Palestine. And at the end, we'll talk about different opportunities such as advocacy with Wadi Fukin or going on other delegations that are planned and happening in August. But just a few words about my own participation in this delegation. Sure. Okay, I just got a question. We will have other general question time at the end, but just so you know, this is being live streamed. So we had RSVPs in person about 30. We had 175 RSVP overall. So there could be up to 120 or more. We had a question from the audience here about who is involved in this. So hopefully the people who are tuned in now and people who will watch the recording and people who are here in person. So by God's grace, there are 77 watching right now. So we look forward to this having a greater impact in addition to the folks who are here. Also, I don't think I introduced myself fully. I'm Jen Hostler. I'm one of the pastors here at Washington City Church of the Brethren. I'm a community psychologist, organizer, activist working for peace in Palestine. And so I said yes to be part of the Stones Cry Out delegation. I have a long journey that I can't really recount right now, but coming out of a place that was really supporting Christian Zionism and then moving to learning about the Nakba, learning about Palestinian Christians, learning about Palestine in general. And my partner and spouse has been on the boards of different Christian organizations working for peace in Palestine, such as Churches for Middle East Peace. And what used to be Christian peacemaker teams is now community peacemaker teams. So before October 7th, I knew a fair amount about the occupation, but I had never been to Palestine before. And then after October 7th, started getting involved and taking action in various ways, starting with multi-faith coalitions, and getting my feet wet in nonviolent direct action, which we'll share a little bit more about later. But I heard about this opportunity for the Stones Cry Out delegation, which had, I believe, I'm not remembering right now, maybe Scott could help me out. I think there were 12 different Christian denominations represented and 18 people around there, 24 people from all across the US. Some of the things that stood out to me. So I had been working and organizing and laboring and getting arrested for ceasefire in Gaza. And then here I found myself in Bethlehem eating bread about 60 miles from Gaza where people were starving. And it was both meaningful to be there, to be at Munthar Isaaq's church and guest house, and also just gut-wrenching to know that I am so close and I'm fed and people are starving, and it's supported by my tax dollars. So delegations are very informative, but also meaningful and hard, an expression of embodying solidarity and incarnated solidarity that Palestinian Christian leaders have been calling for. And that was one of the reasons why I said yes. We heard that people felt alone, that people felt like Christians weren't caring about them, especially US Christians. And so many of us answered that call to be alongside and walk with our siblings in Christ there, as well as Palestinians and Israelis in general who were working for peace and working for justice. Another really poignant piece was being in Hebron. We were given a tour by Issa Amro, who is a human rights activist. If you Google his name, you'll find a New Yorker article, a New York Times article. Issa is a proponent of nonviolence, and yet on October 7th, as he told us when we were with him standing on the streets of Hebron, he was arrested and beaten and sexually assaulted and tortured. And I think hearing that message that even someone who is purporting nonviolence, that there's no space for nonviolence, was devastating and powerful, and also continued to just really build up my own commitment to taking courage and taking action for justice and to keeping my own government accountable. And so that was powerful. And we walked through the streets of Hebron. I'll just share this one image is walking through the old city. And I know Issa pointed out that there are cages above the streets of the old city in Hebron. And these cages are there, and fabric or tarps are there. Because Israeli settlers, have stolen the apartments on top of many of these old marketplaces. And then eventually the Israeli military will come up and say they'll close the shop down. But settlers who have stolen these apartments up top will drop garbage and disgusting things like urine, or Issa mentioned covered in some type of black liquid one time. They just throw them on Palestinians. So being there and seeing with my own two eyes things that I had only heard about was a really, again, devastating but powerful and motivating piece. While we were also there was a Shabbat walk that basically some Israeli settlers like to take a walk through the old city, and they were armed by a phalanx of Israeli soldiers, and everyone had to move aside. We were pressed against the shops, and this was just this little stroll, basically saying, what can we take next? So throughout the trip, we saw both immense dehumanization, but also immense resilience and perseverance of the Palestinian people, and that sumud, that commitment to the land, that steadfastness was really evident. So I'm grateful for my time there, and I really encourage other people, if you haven't been on a delegation, to go. We will talk more. Eli will talk more in a few minutes about some delegations coming up in August. And that concludes our delegation piece. And we will be moving next towards advocacy. Let me grab my laptop. We will be touching on two different forms of advocacy. We have building solidarity through advocacy that is political, as well as through social and cultural. So I will be sharing a little bit, partly in the stead of Reverend Dr. Nathan Hostler, my spouse, but also the director of the Office of Peace Building and Policy for the Church of the Brethren. Our son is sick, and so he's at home with him. I'll be sharing a little bit about that, and Philip Farah of Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace will be sharing on state and local advocacy. We'll also be talking about social and cultural advocacy, and Jonathan Kutab, the executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America, will be sharing in that. So I guess one here in person, raise your hand if you've completed some type of sign-on letter, email, or call for your representative. Almost pretty much everyone, almost everyone in the room has completed a sign-on letter. And so many of us have taken this opportunity, whether through Friends of Sabeel North America, Churches for Middle East Peace, U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, so Christian or non-Christian. There are a lot of different ways to try to let your representatives and senators know we are not happy that we're sending bombs to Israel, that we are calling for a ceasefire, that there's a recent sign-on letter from Friends of Sabeel North America asking our representatives and senators not to go to the Netanyahu speech that will be next week. So there are many different opportunities to take action. Also visiting your representative or senator at their home location or here in DC. Sometimes there are advocacy summits where many people come en masse to the Hill to be able to do that, or advocacy days that people can go. I know Mennonite Action has done a lot of advocacy days for their constituents in their home districts. Also, in terms of bridging between the delegation, the Stones Cry Out delegation was unique because there was actually a DC portion built in. And so we had time to both do advocacy, to make Hill visits. Unfortunately, I live in Washington, DC, and so I don't have anyone who can vote, but I did accompany several folks to Summer Lee's office, who is very much for ceasefire, very much for Palestinian rights. Some folks from Pennsylvania, but we did that. And we also had a vigil and civil disobedience at the White House. So sometimes you can combine all of these different actions together, this embodied presence with advocacy and direct action. There are also, another opportunity of follow-up from the delegation was to have a meeting with a State Department official. And so we actually met with an assistant deputy secretary who has since resigned on Palestine, but who we were advocating for and had received direct information from Issa Amro about, like, you should be asking for more settlers to be sanctioned and settlers in Hebron City and this and that. So there are many ways that we can do advocacy. Some key points that Nate Hostler cited. It's really good if you're working in advocacy to have repeated contacts. So numbers and relationships matter in terms of advocacy. And he really stressed relationships, that Hill staffers or any staffers or council members in DC or in your other place, whatever level you're at, they are people. So it's good to be firm and direct, but in his words, don't be a jerk. Or they can stop responding or divert what they're doing. And Nate encourages people to link to their personal commitments, their faith commitment, their experiences, and also to really try to keep consistent talking points, both on your general efforts across movements and organizations as much as possible. We'll be sharing out some other links and resources about advocacy, but I know that Philip Farah will be sharing about state and local level advocacy focused on Virginia with Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, and he has some slides, so we can pull those up. I will say 2 words about Philip. I did find a bio for Philip. Philip was born in Jerusalem in 1952, 4 years after his family was driven out for their home in what became Israeli West Jerusalem. And he received his education in Jerusalem and eventually was active in the nonviolent struggle against Israeli occupation. He was among Palestinian progressives who pioneered relationships with anti-occupation Israelis. And Philip came to the US at the age of 27 to study. I will skip ahead to mention that he's a founding member in 2000 of the Washington Interfaith Alliance for Middle East Peace and also Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace. We're really grateful to have you here, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Jen. And thank you, everybody, for coming and everybody on the Zoom. Yeah, I also, I heard a number of people mention prison issues and administrative detention. I was myself a victim of administrative detention and torture in an Israeli prison in 1976. And that's a really close issue to my heart. And as Jonathan and others know, the situation in prisons has become unbelievable. The torture now, Ben-Gvir is the Minister of Internal Security. He is really the king, along with Smotrich, of the West Bank. He has really transformed the prisons into torture chambers for everybody. I'm going to talk in my capacity as somebody who's with the Virginia Coalition for Human Rights, which focuses, as the name suggests, on Virginia. Virginia gets a huge amount of its GDP, its income from the military and from military industrial companies. And as you know, Israel is very heavily involved in supplying military equipment, especially surveillance equipment all over the world, and some Israeli companies are involved in this in Virginia. The Virginia Coalition for Human Rights is a coalition of 23 organizations. It's one of the most diverse groups I've ever come across. It is interfaith and secular. Jewish, Muslim groups and Christian groups and secular groups are among the 23 organizations that belong. Diverse people from the age of 18 and even less to the age of 85 plus, and everything in between. And so next, please. Yeah, in contrast, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee and its minions, many of which are in Virginia, every state has them, the JCRCs and other groups that are really, part of the Israel lobby, they are very, very active on the level of state and level politics. So they do things such as, advocate for shutting down Palestinian solidarity speech, advocate for laws, legislation that requires basically an oath of allegiance to Israel, that you won't boycott Israel, otherwise you can't get a contract with the state, and the like. And another thing that they do is they cultivate politicians who rise from local positions of elected positions, from local elected positions to state positions, and then end up in Congress and, very powerful positions on the federal level. They, they take them from the cradle to, on. And so it's important to engage on that level as well. And then another thing is, and this is particularly important in Virginia, promoting investments in Israeli companies complicit in Israeli apartheid. And to this point, Virginia has actually a unique state institution. It's called VIAB. I think it stands for Virginia Israel something, basically investment outfit that promotes Israeli companies and actually is funded by the state, this outfit, to promote them and get them to locate in, and many of them are military companies, but others, are involved in different ways in Israel's apartheid system. Next, please. So this is an example. In fact, it was the first time I did lobbying because I recently retired and now I'm allowed to do lobbying. I retired from the government, and we went to Virginia for the legislative session. There were over 60 people, incredibly diverse, and we lobbied and defeated a number of terrible, terrible bills that AIPAC's minions basically introduced. One of them is, and they keep reintroducing the anti-BDS legislation, and we have defeated it several times. Next, please. Another successful campaign was in 2020, that dates me. 2018, the VCHR, our group, discovered that this group called, I forget the name, the next slide has it, is promoting edits to textbooks that are used in Virginia: history books, geography books, books on culture, textbooks used in the school from, from from elementary level all the way to high school level. Edit them to take words like occupation out, referring to Israel as not use the word settlement, replace them with neighborhoods alike. And so VCHR waged a campaign. Next, please. So so we waged a campaign. These are examples of books. The list is this long of the books. I just chose 3 as an example. The name of the organization, by the way, has a name that has nothing to do with Israel. The name, it doesn't, but Institute for Curriculum Services, and it's basically an AIPAC outfit, or AIPAC supported. And Virginia, the VCHR collaborated with Virginia professors. And as far as we know, the edits were, well, back then they were dropped. Hopefully there's still, I'm not sure on the status if the person who's leading this effort has been checking, but this is another thing that we can do, you can do. So this is really for people who are in this in the long run. My point is to encourage you to work not only on the federal level, but also very much try to engage on the state level as well. Next, please. Sorry, I'm taking too much time. Tell me when I need to shut up. Okay, and so this is another example. This is an example of energy company, solar energy. Who's against solar? It's a good thing for, but this is a solar company that has terrible environmental record, destructive, all kinds of runoff, and they use cadmium in their solar equipment, and it is very, very bad when the life cycle runs out, when there's no way to recycle them, and it's very poisonous. And Virginia Coalition campaigned on the local level with many small communities and shut down these. This is only a small list of the locations that were shut down. I'll end it there. I'm sorry. Oh, yes, it is. I'm sorry. It is an Israeli company, and its presence in Virginia was actually, promoted by this Virginia office that I mentioned. And Virginia actually also has an office in Tel Aviv, you know, that promotes investments in Virginia. Thank you. So the last word is please, try, you know, especially if you're in this in the long run, you know, try to engage on the local and the state level as well, the federal level.
Thank you, Philip. And I'll also put a little plug in. We don't have a lot of time to cover it, but there are local ceasefire resolutions, including there's being continuous pushes on the DC level for ceasefire resolutions. And I invite you to check out your own local area and see if there's a ceasefire resolution that you can be part of, amongst other divestment, which we will talk about later. And so next, I will invite up Jonathan Kutab. He's a co-founder of Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq and co-founder of Nonviolence International, as well as a well-known international human rights attorney. And Jonathan is currently the executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America, one of our co-sponsors. Thank you so much for coming, Jonathan. You can stop sharing.
Thank you. There is so much to say to a group like this of dedicated activists who are seeking to find what is the proper Christian response to the events that are taking place in Palestine, Israel, particularly in Gaza. And perhaps there is a tension that needs to be held between activists who want to actually influence the things on the ground, because as US citizens, we are actually participants. We are not only enablers. We are not only complicit. We, through our government, are actively participating militarily, intelligence-wise, financially, but perhaps most importantly, by providing a political umbrella, by actually undermining international law, international institutions, international courts, international solidarity, international principles. I sometimes say to people, the Palestinian people will somehow survive, but will international law survive? Will a system of international courts survive? And for Christians, will our witness survive? We all know to this day how horrible it is that the church was silent during the Holocaust of the Jews, which took place largely in the dark. I mean, people in Germany claimed they didn't even know it was happening till after the war. And still, the burden, the guilt, the feeling that the church didn't do enough to stop the Holocaust continues to haunt us to this day. What about what's happening in Gaza, where it's happening in the open, where people are openly saying we're cutting off their water and their food and their fuel, where people are saying we need to destroy Gaza completely, where people are openly forcing them. I mean, yes, they try to hide the facts by preventing international journalists from going in and by literally hunting down local journalists and killing them. Over 100, 150 have been killed so far. But still, we know what's happening. It's open, and yet we are not doing enough. We are silent. What should the Christian position be? As I said, there is this tension between being participants and needing to put a stop to our governments, our countries' complicity and participation in the genocide. A tension between that and between our position as a church, which is more a religious, a spiritual, certainly not a power-oriented position. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. Jesus did not want to establish by force the rule of Christian. This is, by the way, what's wrong with Christian nationalism, is they try to subvert the message of Jesus Christ to becoming a message of power and control. So how do we deal with this tension? And the way we deal with this tension is by recognizing that what is happening is, at its very roots, a spiritual battle. A battle of ideas and ideals. It's a battle between those who value human life and those who think it is dispensable. Between those who believe in human dignity and human law, and between those who are dedicated to military power as the only solution to problems. You know, I was wondering, why is it that even to call for a ceasefire is controversial in this country? It wasn't that way. In almost every other situation, the first thing you do is hey, let's stop the fighting and let's talk this over. So calling for a ceasefire was not controversial until we find ourselves in a situation where those who call for a ceasefire are calling for negotiations, are calling for discussion, are calling for international law, are calling for an end to fighting. And they are opposed by those who say, no, military power is the only way to go. Hamas is evil, therefore we must not defeat them, but destroy them. That destroying Hamas, this evil force, becomes a legitimate objective. So if we kill several tens of thousands of people in the process, well, that's collateral damage. If we force millions out of their homes, why, that's necessary because we're trying to find these tunnels. If we destroy all universities, half of the schools, all of the houses of worship practically in a particular society, that's fine, because we are trying to reach this objective of destruction of our enemy through military force. If military force doesn't work, then we double down and we get more force and more power and more bombs and more destruction. And our message is a prophetic message, which is that violence is not the answer. It does not work. It does not get you security. It does not get you safety. It does not get you what you need. This is a spiritual battle. And the church is not carrying its task to proclaim Jesus's message that violence does not work, that human beings, all human beings, are worthy of dignity, are children of God, should not be killed, should not be destroyed, that people deserve to live, to have life, and to have it more abundantly, that education, housing, freedom of movement, self-determination, human rights, and human dignity are essential values. They are not luxuries that need to be sacrificed as we pursue our military objectives. They are the goal. They are what we need to be seeking for everybody. That any ideology that's based on racism. I mean, what's wrong with apartheid, really? What's wrong with apartheid is that it distinguishes between human beings and said those are worthy of certain things and those are less worthy, and they should have different rules and laws and locations applied to them. What's wrong with racism? Well, racism is, again, a violation of the principle that God is the father of us all and that we are all equal in his sight. What's wrong with anti-Semitism and Islamophobia is that it says that there's one group that doesn't deserve to be treated the same as everybody with equality and dignity. This is a spiritual battle. And the church should be at the forefront of that battle and not hesitant and lagging behind. I am ashamed that the leadership of the movement for justice often comes from outside, not always, but often comes from outside the church. I am pleased that many people at the forefront of that battle themselves are Jewish people who are saying, not in our name, this is wrong. We don't believe in this. This is against our Jewish values. Not just this is not working, or this doesn't help, or ultimately this is bad. No, it's wrong because it is wrong on principle. This spiritual message, this spiritual battle is the one that the church ought to be very involved in, through preaching, through teaching, and through actions. You know, when we talk about divestments, it's just not to help the Palestinians. It's so that we don't benefit from their suffering. When we're talking about boycotts, we're not talking about, somehow helping the Palestinians. We're talking about we cannot participate in this evil process that is hurting other people. When we're talking about sanctions, we're talking about we will not be party to things that are violating international law and violating the principles of justice which we believe in, and we want to bring an end to it. When we talk about nonviolence, we are declaring to the whole world that military power is not useful, is destructive, only brings suffering and death and hatred and perpetuation of ongoing enmities between people. This is a message. We do have a message, and it's a positive message that the church should be giving, not just Palestinians. You don't preach nonviolence only to the weak. Preach it to the oppressors. Military power is not going to help you, Israel. We're not going to send you more weapons. We're going to stop sending you weapons, and we're going to help you achieve a genuine peace with Palestinians, including your enemies, including Hamas, including those you don't like, because you need to live together in peace. And this is the message that the church should be bringing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Jonathan, for that message we all needed and the church needs, and really appreciate your words. And related to boycott and divestment and sanctions, we've talked about building solidarity through delegations, through advocacy, both political and social cultural. And next, I'm pleased to invite Allison Tanner to lead a big section on building solidarity through economic means. So she is, let me bring up a very brief bio. I had it in here. I lost it. Okay.
I can introduce myself if that's helpful.
Wonderful. Yes, please. Thank you so much, Allison, for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. We've heard a lot of harsh realities, a lot of painful, almost unspeakable realities that are absolutely taking place because of our government, often in the name of Christianity and at the expense of our humanity. I always find myself needing every now and then to just hold my heart and take a few deep breaths to take in the pain. We must also turn to God and take in the breath of the Spirit to reground us and reconnect us. The good news in the midst of all the horror is that there are things that we can do. And when it comes to what we can do, the best way to discern this is to listen to Palestinians. Listen to Palestinians reaching out to the international community, listening to Palestinian Christians, reaching out to the international church to say, here's how you can help us. And Palestinians have done that very clearly, very succinctly. One of the most impactful ways to participate in solidarity with Palestinians is through economic activism, through engaging in what's known as the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. An absolute majority of Palestinian society has come together to say to the international community, here's how you can help us. Again, the Christian Palestinian community has reached out to the international church saying, here's how you can help us. BDS, the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, upholds the simple principle that Palestinians are deserving of the same human rights as the rest of humanity, and that the rest of humanity has a responsibility to do what we can to ensure that our Palestinian kindred have basic human rights. The demands of boycott, divestment, and sanctions are freedom. Freedom from occupation and colonization, the same demands that Moses had. The second demand is justice. Justice for the diaspora through the right to return. Justice is the same message that the prophets had. And the third demand is equality. Equality for all who live in Israel, the same demand that Jesus had and that Paul had. BDS is a way of engaging in nonviolent forms of resistance by, as Jonathan Kutab so powerfully just said, non-cooperation, removing ourselves from the violence that is taking place and would take place in our name if we weren't to intervene. Non-cooperation, specifically with Israel's apartheid regime. Boycotts simply say, withdraw your support from Israel's apartheid regime. They can be economic, they can be cultural, they can be academic, and they all target entities complicit with apartheid or in direct violation of Palestinian human rights. And the Boycott Chevron campaign is the newest campaign. It's really growing in its visibility and its ability to be effective. I'll put that in the chat when I'm done talking. Divestment campaigns are campaigns that urge churches, pension funds, universities, banks, and local councils to withdraw your investments from the state of Israel and all Israeli and international companies that sustain Israeli apartheid. I want to give a huge shout out to denominations that are hard at work on this, specifically the Methodists and the Presbyterians have made real strides towards success. Student groups have been able to do this at the university level, even cities in the Bay Area where I live, Richmond, Hayward, and Alameda have all passed divestment laws in their, or statements or commitments in their cities. And I will in a moment put a way to learn more about divestment and how to divest through American Friends Service Committee. Sanctions is the third way to engage the S and BDS to pressure governments not to aid or assist in apartheid regimes or their maintenance, to ban businesses with illegal who are doing business with illegal Israeli settlements, ending military trade and free trade agreements, and suspending Israel's membership in the UN. It's important to understand that the BDS movement is until. It's not eternal, but it's until Israel complies with international law and universal principles of human rights. Is modeled after non-cooperation strategies and the struggles against South African apartheid and Jim Crow apartheid here in the United States. Many of you are familiar with the Montgomery bus boycott and the invitation for the international community to engage. BDS has been extremely successful at mobilizing support for Palestinian freedom, and because of this, it is under attack. Because of this, there is lots of misinformation and disinformation being spread. So the best way to get current, accurate information is the BDS website, bdsmovement.net. Again, I will put all these in the chat when I have just a minute. But as we think of BDS and engaging in BDS, One of the specific calls of BDS is to create apartheid-free zones. And creating an apartheid-free zone is creating a space that's willing to name Israeli apartheid and do what it can to cut ties with apartheid. And so this concept of apartheid-free zones has been responded to by the church in North America, by representatives of denominations throughout this continent who came together in September of 2022. Christian leaders from the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Mennonites, the Quakers, the Unitarian Universalists, the Baptists, and others to say, what is the role of the church in this moment? What can we do? And by September of 2022, we were already in a moment, a post-COVID moment where there was consensus among all the major human rights organizations internationally that Israel is practicing apartheid. And this includes Amnesty International, this includes Human Rights Watch, this includes B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights organization. Palestinian and South African human rights organizations have long been saying our situation is apartheid. And echoing this call was a call from Kairos Palestine, Palestinian Christians and their international solidarity community entitled I don't know if you can see it, a dossier on Israeli apartheid. This is an epistle and a modern day epistle written to the international community saying one of the ways that you can help us is by creating these apartheid-free spaces, apartheid-free zones. And so these church representatives got together and said, we'd like to create apartheid-free churches. We'd like to create apartheid-free congregations and communities that are willing to take serious this call. And we know for that to happen, we're gonna have to do a lot of education, and we're prepared for that. And we know for that to happen, we need to find a way to unite communities in making this commitment. And so the apartheid-free pledge was born. And I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share so you can see this pledge that was created. A fairly simple pledge, a fairly universal pledge of commitment. We affirm our commitment to freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinian people and all people. We oppose all forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and oppression. And we declare ourselves an apartheid-free community, and to that end, we pledge to join others in working to end all support to Israel's apartheid regime, settler colonialism, and military occupation. Again, this pledge was written in direct response to Palestinians reaching out to say, here's what you can do. And while the pledge was created originally by representatives within Christianity, it was never meant to be exclusively Christian. It wasn't long before our interfaith brethren came to us and said, can we take the pledge? We want apartheid-free synagogues. We want apartheid-free mosques. And absolutely, so it quickly became interfaith. And of course, people that don't have a faith grounding came to us and said, well, we want to be part of this. We want to take this is a powerful pledge and we think it's really important. We want to take it. And so solidarity groups and nonprofits and businesses have all learned about the pledge and have taken it. We are now in a moment, and let me just go to our communities so that you can see we have currently 369 communities who have signed the pledge. 152 of them are faith-based communities, and I believe 65 of them are congregations of a variety of different faith traditions. There's 128 solidarity organizations and then 89 businesses and other organizations. Here you can see, again, we focused on North America, but we couldn't fully contain the excitement of this. If you're familiar with Jesus in the Mark's gospel, where he goes around healing people and people can't wait to tell everyone. And he says, no, let's just be quiet about this for a little bit. We need to grow. The timing isn't right. And they couldn't contain it. And the gospel just kept spreading. So too has the interest in apartheid-free communities. And I hope that this is something that you can take back to your church, or to your faith community. You can go to our website, apartheidfree.org. In the About section, you can read about who we are, and we have some really good frequently asked questions that give you the crux of the history of this pledge, what it commits yourself to, what it's about. We have a variety of resources from introductory materials. Even introducing the pledge begins a conversation in your congregation that can lead to Bible studies, that can lead to films, that can lead to educational materials. We have campaign materials, videos, a variety of other things. And then we also have ways to take action. We have a long list of ways in which communities have taken action to live out the pledge. What does it mean to take this pledge? Well, it means three things. First, it means that your community, it's not for individuals, it's for communities. It means that your community is willing to publicly name Israeli apartheid. One of the goals is to make sure that people know what is happening. If people know, then their moral conscience will push on them, will agitate them. And that clearly is what needs to happen. The second thing that the pledge does is it is a commitment to take action. What that action looks like is context specific. For some churches, putting up a ceasefire banner is the action. For some churches, hosting a film festival or an education series for their community is a way to take action. For some groups, engaging in boycotts or divestment or advocacy or direct action or going out into the streets, there are a variety of ways, and there's no one right way to take action except for looking internally in your community and what's an action that really fits who you are and how you can deepen your commitment to cut ties to Israeli apartheid. And then the third thing, when you sign the pledge, is you become part of the apartheid-free network. You become part of this network of over 365 communities that are working together, and we share resources, and we share ways to take action, and we share opportunities to support one another. If you're discerning what it might look like to engage in boycott, and you want to talk to other churches that are along the same lines or that are thinking about Bible studies, and you want to work together, there's something for everyone. The call from Palestinians to engage in boycott, divestment, and sanctions is a goal, and one of the ways to get there is to take a pledge, to study a pledge, to move toward education of what's happening so that you can then commit to take action and be part of this growing force that is standing up and saying, this cannot happen, and we must be part of the solution.
Thank you so much, Allison. We're grateful for your work with apartheid-free communities and with AFSC and making this resource to mobilize us, to mobilize congregations. Really appreciate that. And finally, I will recognize that we're almost at time. So we will, Eli and I have spoken about how to condense a little bit some of our nonviolent direct action piece, building solidarity by putting our bodies in the streets. We started a few minutes late, so I hope that you can just stay a few minutes more, and then people can be free to go, but we can also entertain a Q&A time, and we'll follow up with some more resources as well. So nonviolent direct action, putting our bodies in the streets, there are a lot of ways to do this through both local and national coalitions, local calls for ceasefire, local mobilizations, and also for those of us here in Washington, D.C., we are here, and there are a lot of different protests that come here. And one of the things that Christians can do is enter these coalition spaces visibly as Christians and intentionally as Christians about being clear that these are your faith values that are coming behind you and empowering you in this work. So, I mean, it's a little easier for clergy to be a little more symbolically visual as a Christian. I brought a protest collar in order to do this because it's not part of my tradition. But there are other ways that Christians can come into the space, like intentionally as Christians. But one specific example of a series of direct actions, I'd like to invite Dr. Eli McCarthy of Franciscan Action Network, and who's also been convening Christians for Ceasefire, a coalition, to come and just talk about the Lenten ceasefire campaign really briefly. And this was a series of events And Eli will say more. So I welcome you, Eli.
All right. Well, wonderful to be with you all. I think maybe we can do a little stretch if you need to stretch. I know we've been hearing a lot of information, and if I was in my classroom, we might stand up and walk around the room. But I'm just going to run through a few slides about a particular campaign called the Lenten Ceasefire Campaign, which happened this past spring. So this organization or coalition, Christians for Ceasefire, has about 25 or so national and some local Christian organizations. And part of the journey since October 7th was to try to think strategically, right? There's lots of different actions, lots of different things people are doing, but how can we think and pray and discern what is going to be more likely to impact the situation and to help us grow as Christians on the journey? So if you go to the next slide there, one of the steps in this work is to take time to sort of develop a bit of a strategic plan or a strategic campaign in this case, where there's a short kind of vision statement. What is it that we hope will eventually play out? A more specific strategic campaign goal, like a bilateral ceasefire. Smart objectives, that is, these things that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So in our campaign, we're not expecting everything bad to change and get better, right? We're focused, and we're going to try to get a piece and move the bigger picture closer. We have a theory of change. If we do these things, this is what we expect could probably happen and get us kind of closer to our goal and vision. Sources of power to influence, like numbers of Christians engaged in this issue, or changing the dominant narrative about this issue. Spectrum of allies is like, who are the organizations or the key people that may sort of agree, but they're a bit passive? How can we get them to be more active allies? And then a sequence of actions are the different steps that we sort of laid out for this 6-week or so campaign. So next slide. So these are some examples of kind of the sequence of actions. We started February 14th, Ash Wednesday, with a liturgy and an ecumenical witness at the White House. This was sort of the launch of the campaign. About 150 or so participated. And then we did a risking of arrest action where 14 or 15 risked arrest at the White House. The 21st, a week later, we joined a multi-faith peace pilgrimage that was coming down from Philadelphia, arrived in DC. We had a vigil there at the White House, and there's a pretty high-level meeting at the White House as well. The 28th was focused on grassroots. We created a toolkit to try to support grassroots activity and mobilization. The 6th was a faith delegation, the Stones Cry Out, came back to DC, and we supported their vigil at the White House. There's again a nonviolent direct action where about 125 participants were there, about 17 or 18 risked arrest. And then March 12th was focused on political education. So we did a pretty big webinar with FOSNA on Christian Zionism and boycott divestment. Over 600 people registered. It was a pretty great series. There was also a webinar from the Parents Circle, which works Israelis and Palestinians working on reconciliation in their space. And then on the 21st, we had a pray-in at the Senate, one of the Senate buildings. About 80 participants, 13 or 14 risked and did get arrested on that particular day. And then a day later, we met with Senator Kane's office. Next slide. So these are just some pictures. This was February 14th. You can see the liturgy there, and then some others with the ashes and some of the signs. Next slide. This is also that day, sort of part of the risking arrest action by demonstrating, holding signs at the actual fence. Go ahead. And then this was March 21st, the pray-in at the Senate building. We had Reverend Graylin Hagler speak to us outside. We did prayer, and then we went into the Senate rotunda, and we demonstrated, formed a cross and a circle, sang songs, and this was all a violation of the laws at that point. So a number of people, 14 or so, got arrested. Next slide. So just some of the impacts, right? When you're thinking like how to develop a strategic campaign, you want to try to track the impacts as best you can. And there's lots of different things you can try to track or get a sense of. One here was our contact list, for example, for the Christians for Ceasefire increased fourfold over those 6 weeks. So we broaden out our mobilization. Coalition partners were also increased. We connected with Christians for Free Palestine and the National Council of Churches, also Rabbis for Ceasefire and Islamic groups. So we're starting to build out the coalition. In terms of press, there was a number of different articles in Religion News, National Catholic Reporter. So we tracked the different press that came out as well. Policy development. So what was happening in the policy scene during this period of time? So February 19th, just after about a week after the beginning of Lent, Biden finally called for a temporary ceasefire in a UN resolution. About a week later or so, March 2nd, many of the center-left mainstream commentators started challenging Biden more publicly. On March 14th, Senator Schumer gave the speech calling for new elections in Israel, saying Netanyahu was a barrier to peace. March 25th, the US finally allows a UN Security Council resolution for immediate ceasefire to pass. During Lent, Congress members went from about 64 people that called for ceasefire up to 78. And this led into a Pentecost campaign after Lent and a major action with Christians for Free Palestine, where over 50 people risked arrest in early April, about a week or so after Easter. And then finally, this movement cycle, right, this wave of momentum. At the end of May, Biden finally calls for and lays out a plan for a permanent ceasefire. We still have work to do. There's a lot of steps to take, but this is an example of this particular campaign and kind of mapping out the different components and trying to get a sense of some of the impact. So we'll come back in a few moments to talk about some next steps and things that are happening today. Just do one more slide for me. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Eli. There are so many different protests, both Christian organized and also coalition ones that had Christians that we could name. So we can also include some links to some of those different actions in the chat. But with Christians for Free Palestine, that was one of the ones. I'd been part of a lot of actions. And then that action, it was a group of Christians and really couching all of our framing and our messaging in the Sermon on the Plain and about woe to you who are fed now, but blessed are the hungry, for they will be fed. And we went into the Senate cafeteria and said, the Senate will not eat until Gaza can eat, and proceeded to get arrested because we couldn't do that. So there are many ways that you can do nonviolent direct action, both arrestable and unarrestable, with varying levels of risk. And so some of our resources hopefully will be able to share a little bit more about that. But in terms of closing, I do want to challenge everyone to think about, I'm sure many of us who are here, you're taking your time out from your evening, an hour and a half plus, so you are committed in some way to learn how to build solidarity. But some other ways that we can think about going forward. Eli mentioned Christians for Ceasefire. So that's a local convening in DC, but it also has people who join from Atlanta, from other places to think about action. There is Christians for Free Palestine, which has regional networks. You can join on their website. And we'll have these resources. Sign in with a WhatsApp group, a way to find solidarity and connect with other resources. A lot of different denominations have Palestine-Israel networks or PINs, and those can be resources as well. There are also several delegations upcoming, and I'm going to invite Eli up again to talk about some delegations really briefly, as well as a Interfaith for Palestine action that is coming up in 2 weeks here in DC, where people will be coming from all over the country.
All right, so do you want me to mention the July 24th stuff also? So Netanyahu is coming to DC to speak at Congress next week, July 24th. There's going to be a number of different actions that are being organized. There's a Christian kind of start your day off with prayer at 9 a.m. in the morning at the United Methodist Building through Churches for Middle East Peace. And then there are going to be a lot of smaller groups coordinating variety of actions and risk taking to try to sort of slow down that process, disrupt that process. So feel free to connect if you need help getting connected with that. The next action, July 28th through 30th, the Christians United for Israel conference is happening in DC at the National Harbor. So there is an interfaith action for Palestine. These are Christians and Jewish and Muslim partners, brothers and sisters that are working on a range of different ways to disrupt, resist, shift the narrative, do some political education, also do some lobbying on the Tuesday at the same time that Christians United for Israel will be doing lobbying in Congress. So there's a number of different risk levels again, and different ways to participate. If you need help, there's a website, Interfaith Action for Palestine, or you can connect with myself. And then lastly, the delegations. So we are working with FOSNA and Friends of Sabeel North America and Sabeel in Jerusalem, and Christians for Ceasefire and Rabbis for Ceasefire to do 1 or 2 delegations coming up in mid and late August. And these are largely about solidarity and accompaniment. So there will be some learning, of course, but the priority and the request from our Palestinian partners is a need to feel accompanied, and that can include different aspects of protective presence, or at least contributing to protective presence, and will be directed by those on the ground about how exactly to do that. So we would love for others to join us if you're interested. Mid-August, late August, looks like we might have 2, but definitely late August. And again, you can connect with me. My email is emccarthy@franciscanaction.org. I think that's it. There'll be future delegations after that also. So if you can't make those dates, let me know and we'll get you on the list.
Thank you so much, Eli. So we'll be linking some info about those delegations, as well as what was shared with me. It was an invitation to solidarity, calling for delegations that comes from Omar Harami, director of Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center, Rifat Kassis, general coordinator of Kairos Palestine, and Muntari Sak, director of Christ at the Checkpoint Conference and pastor in Bethlehem, also academic dean of Bethlehem Bible College. So there are many calls from our siblings in Christ, but that one is really urging us now to have this accompaniment. I am, again, going to be emailing out more resources, more than we can name. We've been really ambitious of highlighting a lot of different pieces of ways to build solidarity. So I'm grateful for each of you to be here. I'm not sure if there's any way to, if we lingered afterwards, once people are going, to ask questions in the chat, but you can also, everyone should have received an email from me. And if not, it's Jen with 2 N's at washingtoncitycob.org. I'll be emailing all registrants with these follow-ups, but we invite different questions as well. So we will probably have an informal Q&A time as people want here. And I don't want to keep Jesse and our Friends of Sabeel folks on for forever, but I'm grateful for everyone to be part of this today, whether online or in person. So thank you. Thank you, John and Jesse and Janet.